Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm your host Conor O'Neill, joined today by Joe Thomas, Gav Buckland and Chris Beesley as we look back on what has become a pretty momentous day in the history of Everton Football Club. Joe, we'll get straight into it because it's breaking news. We like breaking news at the Echo. Around 10 a.m. this morning it was confirmed that Farhad Moshiri struck a deal with 7 partners to acquire his whole stake in the club. As we sit here right now inside the Echo office, what are your thoughts?
That's it, full stake, the full 94.1% shareholding that Mr. Moshiri has had for so long, and has enabled him to sit above Everton over the past 6-7 years and oversee a period in which I don't think anyone can question that he's put his money into the club, but obviously on the pitch, the club has gone backwards. Off the pitch, the regime has become increasingly tumultuous. Everton surrounded by, Jesus, Sean Dyche word, noise. And that's going to continue. It's going to continue for the next 3 or 4 months at the very, very least. As just part of the natural cycle now that the 777 deal goes through the regulatory process, Premier League, FA, FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. The FA one is mainly just a feeder into the Premier League one, so there's not really a separate set of tests that they have to kind of overcome there. But it's going to be a fascinating period, a really interesting period, because obviously 777 have a big portfolio of clubs that go across the world, but they're also relatively new to this marketplace. I think the company set up in 2015. First foray into football was Sevilla 2018, and in really 2022 that they kind of started their expansion. And now all of a sudden, they come to the Premier League and they come into Everton, and we're going to talk about it a lot now, but obviously, I think that's going to cause some concern to people, some fear, some hope that, I think we have to recognise that for quite a long period of time now, certainly for the vast majority of this year, there's probably been an acceptance, acknowledgement from within the fan base that Farhad Moshiri might not be the right person to lead this club forward. But obviously that only takes you halfway there. It's one thing getting somebody else in, and the other thing is who are those other people. And I think scrutiny just simply has to be applied to them by us, by fans, by the regulatory bodies, and that as well. It's going to be an interesting few months.
Chris, you were sat alongside me in the Echo office this morning when we got confirmation that this news was coming through. Even though this has probably been coming in many ways, given Farhad Moshiri's search for investments in the club, and it's felt for a long time like no kind of option was off the table in terms of what he might accept, even though it looked for large parts like he was going to sell a stake in the club, not his whole stake. Yeah. Even when it dropped all this morning, there was still some shock and some disbelief, I think, that this is actually going to happen now. Farhad Moshiri will no longer control Everton Football Club. Yeah,
certainly, like you say, that the speed of it, and the fact obviously a full takeover now after spending most of the summer caught in a partial investment part into the club. But yeah, it's moved along a pace, and people have said it could still take several weeks. There's hope from both parties there be done from their point of view by the end of the fourth quarter, the end of this calendar year, to actually complete the takeover of the club. But yeah, there are major concerns, and it's not coming necessarily from people from Everton who know. We don't know. Everyone here, and I'm sure everyone at 777 will be hoping once they can usher in a brighter future for the club, and with the move to the new stadium. The club been looking backwards for too long. Actually, look forward to a brighter tomorrow. But there are major concerns over clubs which they've been involved in. As Joe said, they've been recent to the footballing market. This multi-club model, there's a few of those out there across world football. Theirs hasn't been particularly successful. On the one hand, they have taken on ailing football clubs, teams who maybe like Everton have got that illustrious history but are struggling in recent times, both on and off the pitch, and try to turn them around. But fan protests at Standard Liège, the piece about that, we've got the piece coming up later. Vasco da Gama protests there. They've been great. They've been good at making bold promises and telling these teams what they're going to do and have these grandiose ideas, but then actually following that up with investment. Certainly on the pitch, it seems that they've invested money on the day-to-day running of these football clubs, but in terms of on squad building, it's been found lacking. a lot of the teams are struggling on the pitch who they've taken over, and we know with Everton there's no wriggle room left in that point. At one point, one goal off relegation last season, and obviously we're still waiting for the first win of this season. There's not really much scope for Everton to sort of take one step backwards before they go two steps forward. So there are major concerns with this group. We'd love to be sat here telling you, oh yeah, it's great. There's a real sort of buzz around the city, but I think there's a lot of concern over this group.
We will come on to the concerns and where people's opinions may lie on this deal. But Gav, just sticking with kind of Farhad Moshiri and the initial takeover deal that's possibly going to happen. Yeah. So obviously it's not gone through yet, but it looks like all parties are hoping that will go through. Are you shocked that he's selling his whole stake in the club? Did you think that maybe he might have hung on to at least some sort of stake until the club moved to Bramley-Moore Dock and then look to sell up, given Everton would then be a better proposition to investors because of the position they would then be in with the new stadium?
Yeah, he has said relatively recently that the club's not for sale, hasn't he?
Not for sale,
and the indication is he said he could fund the rest of the stadium. So I think maybe something's moved in his world in terms of his finances, which have been sort of somewhat compromised by the obviously the war in Ukraine. So I'm just thinking that from his perspective, there's a possible funding issue for the stadium that he might have to bail out. That there's obviously the running cost of the club as the major shareholder and owner that he might have to assist with. I'm sure the failure to get the MSP deal over the line in terms of their shareholding and pumping money into possibly into working capital into the club was also a blow to him, and I'm sure that possibly those two things are interlinked for me. So he's just thinking, I need to cut my losses now because I suppose as I'm rich, possibly I can't afford the commitment to the club for the next 18 months, something like that. And what happens if we go down? And I think that it's moved quite quickly with that regards. I'm just guessing. I'm sure the failure to get the MSP deal and the stuff with the rights of media funding has come into this really. And that's changed.
You often say, don't you? Years ago, you couldn't be a billionaire a millionaire own a football club, and now it's probably an argument that you can't quite be a small billionaire and own a football club.
No, exactly.
As mad as that sounds.
You referred to that this morning where he played sort of as much as I'm trying to be kind to him here really by saying playing the victim card or something like that. But being an owner benefactor, a single owner benefactor in football at the top table is no longer enough, is it? Yeah. You need to be an equity fund, you need to be a nation state, and that type of stuff. I sort of get that to a degree. But that doesn't excuse what wealth he's put into Everton has been hardly wasted for lots of different reasons. So yeah, it's funny, but that what he says there opens a whole load of risks, doesn't it? We all know the problems with nation states. We all know the problems with equity funds and private investment into football clubs. The multi-club model that we spoken about. So we're just moving from one issue to another. But yeah, that's moved quite quickly. The whole thing, it was poo-pooed on Wednesday. That was the general consensus, wasn't it? That actually maybe he's just testing the market by saying he's talking to 777. I don't think anybody expected within 48 hours it'll be a done deal. For me, obviously, got to go through all the regulatory stuff, which would be interesting, won't it? But yeah, I'm surprised. I'm surprised about the timing, but you could imagine in his world things move rather quickly with his finances at the moment.
Joe, in terms of, Bees touched on it there before, in terms of Standard Liège and Vasco da Gama in Brazil, and we've seen Genoa fans not being very happy, and there's a lot of talk and a lot of noise, to use the word Sean Dyche likes to use, around 7-7 and how they run football clubs and how the fans of them football clubs are not very impressed with what they're being served up, should we say, from an ownership. When you look at that and you understand and you see what them fans are saying, you can understand why so many Everton fans sitting here right now or sitting at home or wherever they may be in the world are concerned about what's going to happen next.
I think, for me, probably the most concerning line of everything that was released earlier on today, or the line that stood out to me probably most, is the final one from 777, that they're not going to be commenting whilst this process, whilst this regulatory scrutiny happens. And I think that's, if they hold true to that, I think that's a big gamble from them. If they hold true to it, it's something that would disappoint me greatly. I think, we if you want to try and give people the benefit of the doubt, I'm sure 777, I'm sure people at Everton who support this deal would want us to stand here and say, look, these people deserve the benefit of the doubt, judge them from their actions once they come in. The reality is Everton's too important to hand a blank cheque to somebody to come and take reins of the club and decide its future. Not just important to Everton fans, but important to the city of Liverpool, and so important to Merseyside. Even from a regenerative perspective, if you look at the importance of the new stadium development to the whole of the Northwest, it's absolutely huge. And the problem is that if they're not willing to come out and state their case for why they would be good owners of this football club, then all that's going to happen is people like ourselves, people like supporters, they're going to look around, they're going to say, well, what do we know about them? What can we find out about them? And the sad reality is that if you look around the world, 90%, probably most of the stories are negative around 777 so far. Now we spoke about kind of a lot of their investment has been recent. They don't have a long track record whereby you can judge whether or not their model works or not. And I think we have to understand, and we have to, show an acknowledgement that most of the places that they've gone into were in trouble before they took over. But when you look at those clubs, there's been no imminent turnaround. There hasn't, in many of them, the cases, there hasn't even been a stalling of the initial decline. And that's problematic. You look at Standard Liège, well, they finished, one of Belgium's most storied clubs. They finished 6th last season. Incredibly disappointed with that. Currently, start of this season, they're 14th. They're second from bottom in the Belgian league, and their fans are holding anti-7-7 protests at games, unfurling banners on them. You look at Vasco da Gama, they went down from Brazilian Serie A. They went straight back up, all right? Fair play. Currently operating in the relegation zone, 5 points from safety, halfway through the Brazilian Serie A league. You look at Melbourne Victory. Year before 7-7 came on board, they finished second. First year that 7-7 involved, they finished second from bottom. You look at Sevilla being the team that they've been involved in since 2018, and they have a minority stake in Sevilla. And Sevilla's a bit harder to judge, and if we're going to be critical of them in other places, you say, well, first few years they finished 4th. And during the 5-year spell, they've added 2 Europa Leagues. Okay, fair enough. But last season, again, you got Sevilla, one of the kind of, one of the major players in Spain and in European football. 5 Europa Leagues they've had in the past, decade or so. And they're a side that were in a relegation battle for most of last season, and they started this season with 3 defeats. They're sitting 20th in La Liga. Reportedly their whole squad up for sale, having just won a Europa League and having just qualified for Champions League this season. Through that, obviously that's going to bring money into the club. And yet you're still looking at something that's performing poorly on the pitch. And they've lost their first 3 games in La Liga. They haven't lost. They haven't had a bad run of luck with the fixture list and played Barcelona, Atletico, and Real. They played Girona. They've played others. Yeah. Now, positive side, you go look at Red Star in Paris. They're top of their league, the 3rd tier in France. And you look at Genoa, who got promoted last season from Serie B into Serie A. They're mid-table after 3 games. So there are kind of outliers within them, but the track record so far seems to be one of, quite often it goes backwards before it goes forwards. It seems at the clubs that they're at, and quite often, whether it be Vasco da Gama, whether it be Standard Liège, you have fan protests. Look at Hertha Berlin, relegated. 777 only came in the back end of last season. They can't be held responsible for Hertha Berlin's relegation from the Bundesliga last season. But after a summer where there's clearly a club that needs a decline arrested, after 5 games, they're second from bottom of the 2nd tier in Germany now. After 5, which is again trouble. And I think the concern for me is Everton can't afford to take 1 step backwards to then try and go 2 steps forward. Because, as Chris mentioned it, they were 1 goal away from relegation to the Championship last season. They came so close the season before. They started this season, 4 games without a win so far. Arsenal's going to be very difficult. Brentford's going to be very difficult. Luton is the first obvious kind of... Luton's the first game Everton will go into as favourites in this second round of fixtures.
And even beating them at home so just isn't going to be enough to stay in the
Of course not. They then probably have to follow that up by beating Bournemouth. And that's just to kind of make up the lost ground from having already not beaten Fulham and Wolves at home, and not beaten Sheffield United away from home. And I think that my concern is probably that with Everton is that the gap between the Premier League and the Championship is probably a bigger gulf than in any other two professional leagues in the whole of world football. And if you've got an organisation that takes over Everton that doesn't necessarily have sums of money or the know-how to kind of address the problems initially, then that relegation could become very, very difficult to deal with for Everton. And you look at the timing of this, and it comes in with Everton having not won a game this season. Now, they're hopeful that they can pass all the tests, and they're hopeful they can get this done before Christmas. But it's probably going to be tight.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be tight. And then you look at it and you think, well, what if it drags on into January? And what if Everton are still struggling? Who makes decisions over Sean Dyche? How does that happen? Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully Everton are mid-table by then. Everything's brilliant. If they get to January and they're bottom three and nothing's quite completed yet, well, who makes decisions over the January transfer market? Because it may well be that Everton need some sort of money being pumped into them. And as Chris says, they don't have a history of investing within playing squads. And, all right, obviously you need huge amounts of money to come into football these days, but these are just some of the concerns that we're looking at, and having such a small kind of amount of evidence, or a lot of evidence but over a small time frame to try and judge 777 by, there are more questions than answers. There are more concerns, I think, than reassurances. And that doesn't mean to say that they're necessarily going to be bad owners or unsuccessful owners, or that they're not going to spend in January. That doesn't mean that at all. But if they're not willing to come out and state their case for that and speak to fans and say, this is what our plans, this is why you can be reassured, this is why you're not going to have 4 months of sleepless nights if the results aren't as good as we want them to be on the pitch. If they don't do that, then there isn't anywhere else for... most of the stories are negative, and that's only going to cause more fear, more concern, more worry, more stress amongst the Everton fan base over 3 or 4 of the biggest months in its history.
Chris, John makes some excellent points there, and is the big issue in all this if 7-7 don't come out and tell everyone why they can be good owners and be a good thing for Everton Football Club? How can anyone else justify and make a reason or a campaign why they can be good owners and take Everton in the right direction?
Yeah, they have to, because otherwise someone else will fill that void. And I was speaking yesterday to somebody before the deal obviously was announced this morning, and it was just a former professional footballer who told me, it was based in the US, who said they'd been warned some months ago about 777 to be very careful about them. Said they dump the money and they promote the asset, and it's concerning. I mean, personally, I'm not a fan of the multi. I know Farhad Moshiri has come out, like as Gav said, and made his excuses, but I'm not a fan per se of the multi-club model. I mean, you could say that obviously there are better examples of it, and I think there was one in the Belgian league there, and Botafogo as well as the guy at Crystal Palace. I'm trying to remember his name. But he's got Botafogo top of the league there in Brazil, and he's got similar sort of portfolio to 777, but he's doing better with it. So whether you're a fan of it or not, and I'm not particularly one, because I think that for better or for worse, I think Everton actually a very unique club, and I wouldn't like the idea of them being just part of one of the various parts of this jigsaw on a multi-club basis. But yeah, so it's up to them. With so many question marks on them, not just in football, I think other interests as well, other sports, basketball, there's question marks over funding with that, and their involvement in the British Basketball League, and even stuff in the aviation industry, all kinds of questions about them. So it's up to them. The emphasis is on them, to sort of to come out and state their case, because these are legitimate concerns, and otherwise, the void is going to be filled by others, and if nobody else is going to speak up for 777, I guess it's up for 777 to speak up for themselves.
Gav, we spoke before we come on air about the whole situation and the whole state of affairs.
Yeah.
Is this another example, probably the biggest example we probably ever needed, that years of reckless spending and mitigating factors elsewhere that maybe Farhad Moshiri couldn't control, that Everton find themselves in this position where the best alternative they've got is a group like 7-7 to come along and take them over?
I was slightly concerned when Farhad said I've been speaking to other potential bidders, and these were the best. I'm thinking, yeah. I remember John Giles, great footballer of Republic of Ireland and Leeds, said once, and a great pundit and writer about the game, said that the worst place in football is to be a big club with no or few options. And that's what we have been on and off the pitch for several years now, to be honest with you. And today is showing that we are certainly a club with very few options off the pitch, because that's why we've ended up with 7-7-7, isn't it, really? And I think that's it, you know, it's testimony to where we are, that we are not going to attract blue chip bidders. That's why MSP would have been a good deal. It's for me. If you see compare MSP and 777, and the people involved in MSP and their reputations and the type of people that they've dealt with and have got access to, and what you hear about them as individuals, and compare the 777 people, you know, the two completely different stories there. And I get there's always grey areas in between within all that, but yeah, you are right. It is another example. You could argue it's let's hope it's the end game within all that. It could even become worse, but I, like a lot of others, were not exactly enamoured by the news this morning. There was an interesting poll, I think, on social media. Like, there was about half the fans said that let's just wait and see, and I get that. You know, there is past reputations, and you know, and there might be lessons learned there. And sometimes, if you are the biggest club in a multi-club group, that can be an advantage to you. That you will attract all the attention, all the resource within that group will be focused on you.
Which Everton would be now.
Which would be, absolutely. So there are advantages. And the fella who's they had the football was the fella who built up Manchester City's group of football group as well. So there's no lack of knowledge there. You know, you could argue that compared to Farhad, there's more football knowledge than Farhad. So I mean, there is glimmers of light there, but you can only judge on what you've heard and what you've read of people who are far closer to things than what I am. And you know, and Chris went through it all there. Is that there's reasons to worry, and what we don't want as a business at the moment is risk, and we've got even more risk than what we had yesterday. As far as I'm concerned, even allowing for Farhad, at least you know your sort of enemy, for want of a better phrase, with Farhad, what he operates at like, and so on. But with these people, you just don't know, do you? And so it is definitely like a testimony to the way stuff has gone for the club over the last 7 years. We've ended at this point. Let's hope it can build back up again from now.
Joe, Farhad said in his open letter to shareholders, which was obviously published on the club's website, that he believes foundations are being laid for a brighter Everton future. Are there any positives to come from this news today? You know, is it a case, what Gav said there, of some support of let's wait and see what happens, or are the warning signs already there before, you know, the ink's even dry on the piece of paper for the contract?
I mean, to use a phrase that we've already used several times, I think the reality is there are more questions than answers. You know, could this work out all right? Yeah, you know, it may well be. Let's be honest. I mean, you know, as myself, as someone that's called for change at the club and the way in which it's ran over the course of this year and at the beginning of the summer, you know, a fresh pair of eyes, new insight, you know, new vision is needed at that club, you know, in some format, whether it just be new people on the board, new people who own it, you know, regardless. And I think, so, you know, on the one hand, it's difficult to see how it could have been any worse over the past few years. It feels like every criteria from which you would judge the way in which Everton's run, you would judge negatively over the past few years, and it'd be naive and it would be unfair of us to think that 777 didn't have a chance to improve some, if not all of those things. But you know, again, obviously this will bring hope and optimism that change might bring a change in Everton's fortunes, but from everything that we can see so far, there's a lot to kind of, there's a lot to be nervous about as well. And it'd be nice to be able to kind of sit here and say something different, but we wouldn't be telling the truth if we did. That's not to say that it can't work out, that it can't improve. It may well do. And I think probably the one thing that we all have to kind of do, regardless of what your position may be on 777, I think we all have to acknowledge that the current situation isn't a particularly good one at the minute, and the current position also isn't really sustainable. And I think we knew that anyway from a kind of almost a political point of view, the current situation with who's running the club, interim boards, and that probably wasn't something that could have a long-term future. But I think increasingly, particularly when you see that the move has gone from selling a stake to selling everything, when you look at the words of Farhad Moshiri, in his statement today, when you look at the reality is that by doing this, it's become clear that Farhad probably wasn't going to be able to leave a legacy on the pitch at Everton. But for some time, you've kind of thought, well, he might be able to leave the legacy of a new stadium, and that is a significant legacy.
Yeah.
Of course, it's huge.
A lasting legacy, isn't
a
it?
lasting legacy, and like I said earlier, not just for the football club, but for the city region, the northwest, the country. So the fact that he's walked away from this now probably suggests to you that there are wider financial concerns over what he can and can't do with the club going forward. We've seen what's just happened in the transfer window. Everton have barely spent a coin at a time when they could really do some, and that's having 3 consecutive windows where significant amounts of money have come in from player sales as well, whilst the wage bill has been reduced at each transfer window as well. So I think we have to kind of look at that and go, well, there wasn't financial stability at the club anyway. It's not like Everton have gone from a position of stability to now uncertainty. They've gone from instability to uncertainty, and that also has to be recognised. I think the status quo probably isn't also sustainable.
Chris, we will have plenty to say, and we will be discussing 777, Farhad Moshiri, and everything off the pitch in the weeks to come and months to come, because this, I think, is going to be a story that we're talking about for a long time. But on the field, Everton do return to action this Sunday. Arsenal come to Goodison Park. Finally, after the international break, the Blues are back in action, and it don't get much tougher.
No. People have obviously pointed out, Sean Dyche's first game in charge as Everton manager was obviously the 1-0 win over Arsenal at a time when they were top of the Premier League, unbeaten since the previous September in that competition. But snap your hand off for a repeat of that on Sunday, wouldn't you? But my big concern is that those recent Everton wins over Arsenal have all been like in the depths of winter time, and maybe the Gunners didn't fancy coming to Goodison on those occasions. It's far too warm and sunny, maybe not so much just right at the moment, but this time of year,
old-fashioned downpour on Sunday afternoon.
Maybe that might help. Actually, if you just take it in isolation, there's a hope that things could actually be turning a corner for Everton. It's been a tough start for the season. Would have expected more points from that, and certainly from the performances they produced, but genuine options now up front with Calvert-Lewin back fit, a like-for-like alternative in Beto, prospect of him making his home debut after a couple of impressive displays on the road there for him. The way Dwight McNeil came back at Sheffield United, his first game of the season, a great provider of goals as well, being last season's top scorer. And there is that, genuine options in across the pitch there, despite it being a small squad. So, we know it's always going to be tough against Arsenal, and you can't go into this expecting a result. But you've got to hope that Everton can start picking up sort of the points to back up those early displays at some point, and this would be a great time to start that.
Gav, that's the big thing, isn't it, going into Sunday? Obviously, with probably the exception of Aston Villa and the first half at Doncaster, Everton's performances this season have actually been quite good. They've been quite positive. I was talking to someone recently who's a non-Everton fan, but he actually said that he thought Everton would go down this season. He said, but he was actually more encouraged from the first chunk of games, having seen what they'll stay up than what he'd seen in the summer because of the performances. But at some point, Everton have got to start getting points on the board, because it's great having good performances, but it means nothing if your points tally doesn't change. The
concern you've got there of the 4 Premier League games we played, the hardest team we faced as Villa, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it?
And bearing in mind, Doncaster were also bottom of the league too. When we visited there.
So that's the concern when you talk about Arsenal. But it's just funny, isn't it? I think, ironically, talking Moshiri, I think we've got more points against Arsenal at Goodison in the Moshiri era than any other
They've not
team.
beaten Everton since 2017, is that right?
Once we got 16 points under Mashiri from 7 matches, 5 wins. Put your money on, by the way, and the centre-half scoring the winner for us on Sunday. Centre-half scored the winner for us 4 times in that time. But yeah, I think I'd fancy our chances to get something on Sunday. I think on the basis that I thought we played reasonably okay against Sheffield United. I'm just wondering with the news today might sort of get the crowd going a little bit on Sunday, hopefully. And I would be, I think it would be a decent game. I think Arsenal set pieces, I think, is their problem, isn't it, really? And that's why we're showing at Goodison. I think, not sure how many of them goals come from set pieces, but probably quite a few.
3 straight away.
Yeah. So I think you get at them with set pieces. But I'm thinking of Branthwaite on Sunday, like that was a decent game for him. He's had 2 decent games against quality strikers and runners from midfield. There's a real test about Branthwaite. He's had like good press since he's come in the team, but this is the first time since he's come back that you're going to say, really how good are you? And that's what I'll be interested to see on Sunday. But I think it's something to get something out of.
Before we get to predictions, Joe, obviously the big Friday talking point as always on this podcast. Sean Dyche has got some real conundrums, hasn't he, this weekend? Because all talk about squads and players and everything else throughout the summer, but he's got some difficult decisions to make this weekend because he's got a few options in a few areas where he's not always had options. I think it's safe to say, certainly up front with Calvert-Lewin and Beto.
Dominic Calvert-Lewin to start up front, Danjuma on the left, McNeil on the right. That's what I think.
No Beto?
No, I don't think so. I think
the fan favourite by Joe Thomas.
I think there's a danger from a kind of almost an optics perspective. I think with Calvert-Lewin being fit and with him having led the line for so long, I think that I think he has to be given the benefit of the doubt. And obviously he's a proven Premier League player, and let's be honest, he was a player who was hugely important to the win over Arsenal last season. I think when the two are fit, the starting position probably has to be that Calvert-Lewin is number one, and then obviously you give that opportunity to Beto to then compete and take it over him. In the same way that I kind of think that Sean Dyche, regardless of what he might have thought or may not have thought, I think that he had to start the season with Michael Keane at centre-back ahead of Jared Branthwaite, and then give Keane the opportunity to almost lose it. And I think he's probably got to do the same, because in a small squad, like you look at the messages that it sends, you can't afford for key players to kind of, to feel hard done by or to feel slighted. And I think that's probably what they've got to do. Actually, you think Beto would also understand why he might be the second choice as a starting point. I think ultimately, probably as just a result of Calvert-Lewin's fitness issues, Beto will probably start a fair few games this season. But I think that's probably how you do it. But yeah, you're right. Obviously, he has got he has got decisions to make. That's good. He will hopefully have more decisions to make soon, because Jack Harrison isn't far away, and then you're looking beyond that. You've obviously got the likes of Coleman and that who could come in.
Of course, as well.
Yeah, Dele's still a way off. Coleman's still a way off as well. Andre Gomez maybe competing in centre midfield. Dyche says he hopes that he stays and that he's got a plan for him for this season. So, you'll have to wait and see. Right,
gents, we will do our predictions. I will kick things off and say 2-1 Everton. I'm prompted by Gav's little nudge there. A Jared Branthwaite winner.
I'm gonna go 1-0 to Everton. I'm gonna go Calvert-Lewin header.
Oh,
there we go. I've got to back it. I've got to back up after that, haven't I?
we
got to be positive. It's going to be very, very difficult for Everton, but why not? Why can't this game? It turned it around last season. It was a hugely important game. Obviously, when they won 2-1 in that winter night, the season before with the Mari Gray's goal. Hopefully, they can do the same again. Yeah,
I'm going to generate an interesting off the pitch discussion with Joe by saying 1-0 Everton, Beto to score. No, I'm going to go for 1-0.
The final word is but you.
Well, I'll say the same as Connor, just because 7 add 7 is 2-1, 21, 2-1 Everton. There you go.
All right. Oh.
That's how we work things out on the Royal Blue podcast.
Everything was a Chris prediction. It's right there. Thanks very much for listening. We will, of course, be back on Monday to review the game against Arsenal and, of course, go in more depth about Farhad's decision to sell his stake in Everton Football Club to 7-7. But for today, thank you very much for listening. Yeah, if you can, mate, yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you just give me a nudge, please, if